Imagine you're sitting in your living room at home. Maybe you're watching a morning news program, drinking a cup of coffee or tea, or maybe reading the paper, and all of a sudden you hear what sounds like a violent earthquake, and the howl and the roar of like the winds of a tornado. You get up, you look out the window, but you can't see anything. So in your curiosity, you decide to walk outside, and you notice people all over the neighborhood have the same idea. And others begin heading into town to see what's happening. So you struggle to decide if you should go with them, thinking, well, what if something tragic has just happened? So nevertheless, you decide to head out, and with the many who are walking by your house, headed into town. And as you're walking with some of your neighbors, you look around and you see your group is growing larger. And say your small group of 20 neighbors or so has turned into a few hundred. And then a few thousand. At this point, you are beginning to wonder what's going on, and you become confused as you see people beginning to run. This group of curious people has now become an intensely passionate mob running to find out what's happening. Being both curious and afraid, you pick up the pace and begin to run with them. And soon enough, you're in a full sprint, and maybe it's the adrenaline, or maybe it's just the unusual situation, but you begin to become excited about what's going on. And running with the crowd becomes a focused, fast-paced need for answers. Everyone arrives at the same point at the very same time, and as you look around, you notice thousands of people have been running in from every direction. Shortly after you begin to look around, you see 125 foreign men and women. They come out of a house with what looks like flaming hairdos. As you stand there looking completely perplexed, you hear all of them speaking. But you know they're clearly foreign. But they're telling you in your own language of these incredible things that God is doing and that He has done in the past. So your natural reaction is to question the reality of what's happening. But there's something about what you're experiencing that tells you differently. So now you're thinking, what can all of this mean? Well, truthfully, that event meant that people and history would forever be changed. The outpouring of God's Spirit had just made itself known to thousands of people, and it was radical. People who were waiting for the Messiah to come, who'd previously denied the work of Christ, had just experienced the incredible life-saving knowledge that comes from Christ through the Holy Spirit. People would never be the same, especially after having seen and heard all of these things. And I can't begin to imagine what that all felt like. Had I been there, I would certainly hope I would have been part of the 1,000 that were amazed, and not like the very vocal minority who were antagonizing the crowd by calling these 125 drunks. It's a great reminder of how people can see something amazing happen, be unaffected by it, and then become cynical in order to downplay the seriousness of that situation. God had just poured out His Spirit in the greatest single manifestation in all of human history to that point. And there were people who said it was all a hoax. Now, in my lifetime, I've learned that whenever there's a great outpouring of God, there's usually a response from Satan to kind of distract us from seeing and believing what God is doing. Well, the very name Satan in Hebrew means deceiver. So Satan's goal is to do whatever it takes to crowd out the message of Christ. Sometimes he has to work extremely hard. Then there are other times we do his work for him. So if we've allowed multiple distractions to add up, we've allowed clutter to come between Christ and us. If we have found our focus on Christ, we have to clear the clutter somehow, and if we want to experience him, the clearing of the clutter, the process begins, and it happens with 3 actions, and it begins by being courageous to act. Now, like anyone in the crowd on the day of Pentecost, they couldn't have experienced this awesome outpouring of God's Spirit if they had remained in their houses or wherever it was they were staying. They had to move, they had to act. Something inside of them was stirring to see what happened. Now, if there's a large boom that happens in or around any of our neighborhoods, I'm not sure that very few of us would stay in the house. Typically, we all go out to find out what happened. I mean, maybe I'm mistaken in that, but if you're like me, you kind of like to find out what's happening or what had happened. But don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. I'm not saying that curiosity and courage are synonymous, because one may be curious, but that does not mean that he or she is courageous enough to act on that curiosity. Then again, courage isn't demonstrated solely in acting to find answers for one's curiosity. Sometimes courage is seeing a problem and stopping at nothing to solve it. Now, Mark's gospel account, chapter 2, verses 4 and 5, are a great demonstration of courage. So let us look at these verses. They couldn't bring him to Jesus because of the crowd, so they dug a hole through the roof above his head. Then they lowered the man on his mat right down in front of Jesus. Seeing their faith, Jesus said to the paralyzed man, "My child, your sins are forgiven." Well, I love this particular passage, this account, because it has so many different angles to it. Think about being the men who bring their friend, their paralyzed friend, and they bring him to Jesus because you've heard some amazing things about this Jesus guy. He can help your friend, but there are just so many people jammed into this small house, and there's so many people standing outside that you can't even get close to him. It took some great courage to start tearing the roof off of a house in order to get your friend close to Jesus. And I don't imagine these men spent much time thinking, well, this isn't our house, and we can't really lift him up onto the roof very easily. But they did what they had to do. Now imagine being the homeowner. This is one of my favorite angles to look at. You invite some friends over, and they bring this Jesus guy with them, and meanwhile, loads of people start crowding into your house. If you're at all like me, you would start getting just a tiny bit upset, because I imagine people would be standing on your furniture, they'd be knocking things over, and stuff would probably be breaking, like those priceless, gaudy pictures you might have hanging on your wall, or your IKEA coffee table. Now, on top of that, and mind you, the pun is intended, a couple of guys begin to rip a hole in the roof of your house. At that point, I would be livid. Not angry, I'd be livid. Even though there was nothing I could really do at that point, I'm probably jammed into a corner, kind of stewing in my own anger. Now, the best part of this account happens to be the amazement people had when, that they had experienced by the end of this account. Jesus heals this man that they all knew had been paralyzed. But he did it because of the courage and the faith of this man's friends. And the miracle was witnessed by everyone that was jammed into this house. The owner of the house, my guess, was no longer distracted after having seen this paralyzed man rise up and walk. Everything that had been potentially a distraction had been overcome by this courage to act in faith. There were plenty of distractions to focus on, but as the men were being courageous to act, the clutter of those distractions began to disappear. I think we are so blessed to be on this side of Jesus' time in history because we have so many personal and biblical accounts of what he had done, making it easier to be able to focus on him. When we do focus on him and when we do find the courage to act, we need to then be content to obey. There's so many areas in our lives which we need to be disciplined. We have a tough time doing the things that we don't want to do, much less discipline ourselves to be content with doing things that we're told to do. I think there's something within all of us that prevent us from being content with being told what to do. Pride doesn't allow for us to be content with doing something someone tells us. And that prompts me to ask, why is it that children instinctively say no when you ask them to do something? Many times as I grew up, I would push my parents' buttons, and I know that it's hard for you guys to believe. But, I constantly tried to push the boundaries with them. But the one thing that never seemed to budge is this concept of a clean bedroom. My mom would constantly tell me to clean my room, and, for a while I honestly believed she had a second job working with pigs, because she would always comment on what a pigsty this room is. Although it was a major exaggeration, she tried to teach me the importance of obedience. Honestly, there could have been a logical reason for why she wanted my room clean, because, it's not like it was on the way if we had guests over that they would see it on their way to the bathroom or anything. And it's not like my room didn't have a door on it. Those were my arguments, and lo and behold, they did not succeed in winning me any argument. But I, like most children, was never content in doing what I was told simply because I was told to do it. I believed I was entitled to a reason. I learned later that I was terribly mistaken with that kind of attitude. There's a point at which we have to discipline ourselves in being content. We have to learn that we don't need everything we're believed we're entitled to. Now, Paul discusses this a little bit in his first letter to Timothy, chapter 6, verses 5 through 7. So let's take a look at that passage. These people always cause trouble. Their minds are corrupt, and they've turned their backs on the truth. To them, a show of godliness is just a way to become wealthy. Yet true godliness with contentment is itself great wealth. After all, we brought nothing with us when we came into the world, and we can't take anything with us when we leave it. Now, in a day where there were so many false teachers, Paul tells Timothy to be careful, because these teachers show godliness as an act of contrary means. We haven't seen that at all in our lifetime, have we? We haven't seen people pretending to be godly for financial gain. For these teachers, it's about, it's not about being obedient to the teachings of Christ. It's about appearing to be godly. Now, think about if that applies in any way to us. Are there times with which we want to appear godly instead of being obedient? If so, we need to clear the clutter that allows for that to happen. And along with being courageous to act and content to obey, we must be committed to completion. It's so easy to be discouraged by circumstances in our lives. Discouragement is one of the greatest tools in Satan's toolbox. Think about this. One of the greatest ways to bring someone down is to discourage them. And it is the single worst enemy of our faith. So when God doesn't answer our prayers the way we want, there's Satan to place seeds of doubt and discouragement. And after enough time, those seeds grow into full-grown distractions in need of clearing. Now, a number of weeks or months ago, I did a sharing the journey video like we just saw, at which I mentioned that when I'm where God wants me to be, Satan always pushes back with a lot of pressure, with criticisms and discouraging thoughts. So I've had to learn to shift my outlook to see that those comments and that discouragement as a result of being and doing what God has called, not a sign to give up and move on. So seeing past that particular type of clutter took a lot of time and patience. But then again, we do need a reminder. If you're anything like me, you need a reminder every so often. So let's look at what James has to say in his letter, first chapter, verses 3 through 5. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. If you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and he will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. If you're at all like me, you try to get things done as quickly as possible. Endurance is something I can exercise, but I don't really look forward to having to exercise it. As a homeowner, I've come to appreciate doing some of the household responsibilities, and I've come to enjoy many of them, but one that I have not and never will enjoy is mowing the lawn. I hate it with a passion. I own about 1/3 an acre of land, and a little more than half of it is lawn, so suffice it to say, I have a considerably sized lawn that needs to be mowed at least once a week with a push mower, not a riding mower. So every time I cut the grass, I get to a point about halfway through the backyard, and I just look around with kind of a whiny attitude, and I'm like, why does this yard have to be so big? Each time I mow the lawn, I try to find a faster, more efficient way of doing it so I can complete the task in a quicker time. But the truth is, there's a point at which I can't walk any faster, I can't push the mower any harder, and I can't have the mower cut any faster. I just need to suck it up and deal with it. The benefit of being out there cutting the grass is that I get exercise pushing this mower up and down hills, lifting and pulling, and all sorts of movements I don't make sitting on the couch. But like so much in our lives, we have to change our outlook, and we have to reshift our focus to being on Christ and to stop being distracted by the things that happen to us. We can't always change or stop the bad or the negative events, but we can change how we're affected by them. We may not be able to control the events that create distraction, but we can prevent them from becoming a distraction, and from becoming the distractions that clutter and crowd our focus out from being on Christ. There is very little we gain by accident. I mean, typically accidents take things from us. And we can't accidentally stumble into the presence of God. We have to enter in with intentionality, with purpose, and with our highest priority being on Christ himself. Life is not easy, and it's not going to be easy. But handling how we react to life can get easier. If we truly have a spirit-filled life, like those in Acts chapter 2, it won't matter about the hindrances or the distractions. It doesn't matter because God provides the strength and the wisdom to overcome them. You know, like those running to find out the source of this loud phenomenon that had happened on the day of Pentecost, we too should be excited and amazed at what God has done, what he is doing, and what he will do in the future. But the choice to be that person or to be the antagonist is solely yours. So let me ask, will you clear the clutter between you and God? Or will you look at the circumstances around you? Watch in disbelief as God is doing some amazing things. Will you be like the thousands that have gathered and that have experienced this amazement that God brings about? Will you pray with me?